Hello, Dr. Lonsrich again. This is my second video on locomotion, and it actually starts on this slide. And it's about muscles. And it's 8 slides, shouldn't be as long as the last one. A lot of the material that I'm going to present is just content, facts, but there is process of muscle contraction that I'll spend some time on. So first thing, it's organizational muscles, right? And you've seen these terms before probably in some previous course. Skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, some also called visceral muscle. And these are features and functions of those different kinds of muscles, and I want you to know this material. We can also categorize muscles in a different way, and you see here another illustration of how muscles are categorized. And this has to do with striated muscle or skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle can be slow oxidative, fast oxidative, glycolytic, and fast glycolytic. This middle one is kind of a bit of both, right? So this is skeletal muscle, and sometimes we talk about slow oxidative as red muscle or slow twitch muscle, and it's usually associated with endurance. Of course, in humans, we can talk about marathon runners, but if I'm an animal like a bird, what kind of animal is going to have red muscle, endurance muscle? Well, it's going to be like a duck that migrates long distances. And so if any of you ever shot a duck and you open up the bird and you see the pectoralis muscle, it's going to be a deep red color, and that's because they have a lot of slow oxidative muscle. On the other hand, if you opened up a chicken, you're going to see a lot of this kind of muscle, white muscle, fast twitch muscle. It's quick response muscle. These kinds of animals don't fly long distances. They rely on burst activities to escape quickly from a threat. They are fatigue sensitive. That is to say, these animals can't fly very long. These muscles are endurance muscles, but they are not as powerful. It's actually, as you'll see in the next slide, white muscle is more powerful. This is for endurance. So if you're a runner, elite sprinters have a lot of white muscle or fast twitch muscle, and marathon runners have a lot of red muscle or slow twitch muscle. And then there's this middle ground. And here's some illustrations of the percentages of the different muscle kinds in different animal groups. And you see a lot of slow twitch muscle, slow twitch muscle in all of these animals. A lot of them are built for endurance, but this one even more so than this one, right? Dolphin, it has a bit of both, right? And same with the sea otter. Anyway, so the different muscle types are indicators of kinds of habits of movement that are associated with those different animals. Now, I'm not going to talk about what is in those different muscles, but I will say this. Red muscle has a lot of capillaries, and that's why it's red, because there's a lot of oxygen. This is oxidative metabolism. White muscle doesn't have a lot of capillaries. So the kind of metabolism that occurs in white muscle is glycolytic. Not a lot of Krebs cycle and electron transport chain stuff going on in white muscle. And this is an illustration of the power output. White muscle, as I said, produces more power. Red muscle produces greater endurance. Again, trade-offs, just like we've talked about before with some other things. Animals that are found in the ocean, you've probably come across salmon, and some of you go to the store and you see this red salmon meat, and this is an ocean-dwelling salmon, and you think, oh yeah, that's red muscle. It's not, actually. There's very little red muscle in a salmon. Most of it's white. So then what the heck? Where's that red come from? It's not blood vessels. That's keratin. And I don't know if I've mentioned this, but so you might ask, well, why do they have keratin in their muscle? I mean, you certainly can't do them any good. You might not know this, but salmon, when they return to the rivers, often will become red. So, sockeye salmon and coho salmon are great examples of that. And where are they getting that red color? They're getting the red color from the keratin stored in their muscle. All right, moving on. So now let's talk a little bit more about the details of muscle. And this is skeletal muscle. I'm not going to talk about smooth muscle or cardiac muscle. So skeletal muscle consists of many cells, and those cells are called muscle fibers. So this is the muscle, and this right here, is the muscle fiber. And those muscle fibers contain smaller units, which are called myofibrils. And those myofibrils contain within them things called sarcomeres. And this is an illustration of a sarcomere. And the sarcomeres are segments of this myofibril. And the sarcomere has two units that are important to remember. One is the thick filament unit, which is here in blue, and then there are thin filament units here in red. And the thick filaments are made of a protein called myosin, and the thin filaments are made mostly of a protein called actin, but not the only protein here. There's also tropomyosin and troponin that we'll talk about in a moment. So how does this sarcomere look in closer up view? First is that we've got zones or bands that are associated with. This is an actual image of a sarcomere. So this is one edge, and this is the other edge of the sarcomere. And the edges are known as Z-lines. And then there is a band right here in light color. It's called an I band. And the I band straddles the Z line, so it's on both sides of the Z line. And then there's an A band, which you can see here. And then there's an H zone, which is in between this dark and this dark region. And then there are the filaments. So there's an elastic filament, there are thick filaments, and there are thin filaments. And elastic filaments are really not going to be part of the story moving forward. They're in yellow here. And they attach the thick filaments, which are here in red, to the Z lines. Then there are the blue filaments, which are principally actin, but also, as I said, troponin and tropomyosin. And then this is the thick filaments. I'm going to ask you a question. If I'm looking at an I band right here, which of the filaments am I actually going to have contained there? The I band is going to be thin filaments and elastic filaments. If I'm looking at the A band, which of the filaments are found here? It's going to be thin filaments and thick filaments. And then here, it's in this region right here, that is thick filaments, the A band. All right, moving on. So with respect to those bands, you want to remember this: the I band's narrow. A band does not change because the A band is really defined mostly by, as far as color goes, mostly by the thick filament, which does not change in size. And the H zone narrows, as you can see in this illustration. I've got some videos, one at the end of this lecture and also one posted on Canvas that you'll want to watch to better understand what's happening with all these features. So just a reminder, you need to know all the filaments, you need to know the bands and the zones, and you need to know what types of filaments are found in the different bands and zones. Now, so how does this work, right? How do we get a contraction of a muscle? I've got the steps in this process in these next two slides, but I also got the video I mentioned on Canvas, and then a video at the end of this slideshow that you'll want to watch. All right, so let's go through these steps. First, we've got a stimulus from a nerve cell, a neuron, which we will talk about in the next unit. So there's an external source of information, like a car coming towards you, and then there's an internal response that is sent through the nervous system to the muscle fiber. Then at the muscle fiber, there is a electrical communication to the neuron, to the end of the neuron, chemical communication between the neuron and the muscle fiber, and the chemical that is communicating with the muscle fiber is acetylcholine, which you will hear about later when we get into the nervous system. And that acetylcholine triggers an electrical signal to be generated inside of the muscle fiber, which then leads to this part. Muscle fiber initiates the release of calcium ions from storage inside the muscle fiber. Of course, you have to ask, well, why is calcium important here? What is calcium doing? So this is what calcium does. Calcium binds to troponin. Troponin is part of the complex of the thin myofilament. Troponin, tropomyosin, and actin. Troponin is bound with calcium. This exposes a binding site on the actin molecule. It moves aside the tropomyosin that is covering a binding site between the actin molecule and the myosin molecule. The thick myofilament and the thin myofilament can bind, and we call these cross bridges. And the cross bridges are produced from a head on the myosin molecule, which was in a high energy state prior to step 4, and releases that energy and causes the inward movement of the myofilament. And it's important to remember that to get in this high energy state, ATP is used. And you'll see this in the videos. Here's one video. This leads to shrinking of the sarcomere. And that step is repeated 4 through 6, I should say, are repeated several hundred times conservatively, 16 strokes per millisecond. I want you to watch the video and think about how long it took me to explain these steps. And imagine that happening 16 times every millisecond, 1/1000th of a second. And that is it. That is all you have. Watch this and also watch the videos that I've posted on Canvas. Thanks so much. Bye.